In this chapter on the wisdom literature, I'd like students to see that some among the Israelites interpreted the world in a way that was very distinct from the ways that the prophets and the writers of the Deuteronomic histories interpreted the world. While the prophets and the Deuteronomistic historians saw a pattern in life that found faithfulness to bring blessing and unfaithfulness to bring curse, the wisdom writers are not so sure about that pattern. Specifically, the book of Job presents an enormous dilemma for it. It argues that Job, a good person, suffers terrible things that are undeserved, and so it casts doubt on whether that pattern works, at least for individuals. Another thing this literature does is bring us to think about the idea of general revelation, that is, learning about God from the way nature is structured. The prophets thought they heard God very directly. They said, "Thus says the Lord." The wisdom literature, on the other hand, tries to analyze the world to see what they can discern about God from the shape of nature. This kind of analysis, this approach to the divine, has significant resonance with the way that many seek to approach God or the divine today. And so it's important to see that that precedent exists here in the wisdom literature. Another thing that we see happening in this literature is that it presents a diversity that we might not have expected in the Bible. One of the important things we see in the wisdom literature is that Israelites allowed that fairly different ways of thinking about God and God's relationship to the world can all be seen as faithful. While they are substantially different from what we see in the prophets, both were seen by those who compiled these texts as ways to be faithful. This is not pluralism as we think about it, but it does admit to a significant amount of diversity within what Jews of the time that compiled the canon thought about how to approach God. A final thing that I hope students get from this chapter is the idea that ambiguity about the meaning of life is not the equivalent of a lack of faith. In the wisdom literature, we see people questioning whether there's meaning in life and how God might be related to how we seek meaning in the world. They don't have the certainty that the prophets did. But this view of an ambiguous world and difficulty in finding meaning is not seen as a lack of faith. Instead, they seek God in ways that acknowledge how difficult it is to make sense of the world.